Hi, I'm Jim McCann, founder of 1-800-Flowers. We created this podcast to share the wonderful people we get to interact with, we get to meet, we get to know, and most importantly, get to learn from. So I invite you to join us on this journey here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. So we're gathered here today for a conversation that we began several months ago, and I'm with three friends here who are friends of mine, but weren't friends of one another, but have since connected in our first podcast on the subject. And the subject today is about friendship. More specifically, I think we'll talk more about adult male friendships. And as Dick was saying as we were getting ready here, all of a sudden now we're all reading a little bit more in different kinds of publications because we have access to so many things now. And another friend of mine, Adam Hanft, refers to it as source amnesia. We read a lot, we just don't remember where we saw it. When you're reading it digitally, it's not as easy to ascribe to a certain publication or point of origin. And George, frankly, that's how you and I met, because you wrote a fascinating article that was in Psychology Today about 4 years ago, and I reached out to you to connect, and that's how we met one another. But I'd be interested in continuing our conversation about friendship and get all your different perspectives. Looking across my screen, we have Dick Auletta, a good friend and a famed communications expert. Coincidentally, you're all pretty good at communications. And then Dr. George Everly, who's an expert in a bunch of things, and my collaborator on our new book, which is called Lodestar, which we'll be publishing in the fall. And George is on the faculty at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine at the Bloomberg School of Public Health there. And he's made quite a study of PTSD and all things about how people deal with stress, both individually and collectively. And we have a lot to hear and learn from Dr. George today. And Larry Zarin, who we figured out last week, Larry, that we've been known one another and been friends now for 38 years, which is tough because we were both 2 years old when we met. And Larry is on the board of 1-800-Flowers, lives in St. Louis, and another communications expert. Did a lot of different things, but he's most recently and well known for the fact that he was a very early employee of a company called Express Scripts, and he wound up running marketing and communications there. And I think a very big contributor to their huge success was Larry's influence on how they would go to market in a very different and thoughtful way. And I would summarize it as Larry championed the idea that business as theater, how to craft your message in such a way that it's entertaining and makes people stop and say, I like the way they think in that shop. It's attractive to me, and I want to be around a company. I want to listen to a company that thinks like they do. So welcome all. Larry, last week when we were together for a board meeting, you did a terrific presentation to the leadership team of Flowers, and you spent 3 hours, which seemed like about 30 minutes to us, on presentation skills. And I think so much of what you communicated to us last week, and first of all, I've never had rave reviews from someone who's come in to present to us like that before. We had a lady who coincidentally used to be my daughter's boss back at Bloomingdale's when they both worked in the early days of e-commerce, say to me that all her years of schooling, a couple of different masters, she said she's never had a more impactful class in her life. And she had just finished telling her mother that on a phone when I popped in to say hello. So high praise indeed. But what role does communication skills, do you think, Larry, play in our ability to develop, maintain, and grow relationships?
Well, a rather significant one, as my two colleagues here know as well. I would say that I want to correct one thing, and that is it's not really about presentation skills per se. It's about the ability to engage somebody, which means they have to pay attention to you, because we are really hardwired for inattention. And anyone who's really studied the behavioral sciences, I know, some of us have, we have to overcome that. We have to almost earn. So when it comes to friendships, I think that when people speak in an organized fashion and they really can get their point across, you become more engaged, and I think it deepens a friendship.
The point you made last week several times that I think I'd underline here, Larry, is that it's not the other person's responsibility to pay attention. It's your responsibility to earn their attention.
Yeah, my guiding principle on that, and I didn't make this up, I just abide by it religiously, is the burden of good listening is on the speaker. And I think that that plays into the deepening of relationships as well and friendships. The burden of good listening is on the speaker. Most of the people in the business world, I would say only about 30% understand that. They think that the number one goal is to share everything they know about a subject versus organizing the listening. And when you're effective at do that, the benefit is stronger and deeper and more understanding and greater empathy in terms of your friendships. So I think it's highly, highly relevant and instrumental in deepening friendships. And that is for someone to be interested in what you're saying.
Well, we have something else in common. That is, we're all grandparents. And Dick, you had a wonderful experience last summer with your granddaughter. Why don't you share that with us?
My daughter called me one day early in the year and said, "You may be hearing from a TV game show. I put your name in, and it was a show called Generation Gap." We wound up qualifying for the show, and we won.
Wow.
But it was just a gift, and the gift was compounded by friends I had not talked, or people I had not talked to for years who happened to watch the show and reached out to me. And the gift was further compounded by the dozens of people that I had let know we were going to be on, who shared an experience, the depth of which was remarkable.
Dick, share with us the call you got from a friend in California who you...
This is the epitome of what can happen if you're open to friendship. I get a voicemail message that says, "Hi, if this is the Dickie Aulette I knew growing up in Coney Island, this is Gary Hausman. We were friends 70 years ago, and I think of you all the time, and I'd love to reconnect. If it's not the Dickie Aulette I know, I'm sorry for bothering you." He was my best friend when I was 14. He fixed me up on my first date. I had not seen him or talked to him in 70 years. When I went to California subsequently, we had lunch with he and his wife. The emotions were extraordinary. It's like the 70 years melted away. We talk every 2 or 3 weeks on the phone. It's a gift of friendship.
And I know, Larry, you had a joyous moment you shared with me last week about taking your granddaughter to the park and how thrilled you were to see her interact with other kids and not know what to do and all of a sudden make another friend and just reach over and grab her hand.
Yeah. My grandson. I've never heard anybody clearly articulate how much pleasure we get from watching our children make friends. Like, it seems to be an understudied phenomenon. The joy when, you bring them to the playground and you're engaging them and you got them on the monkey bars and you got them, and then all of a sudden they find this little buddy to run with. It brings tremendous joy.
Dick, you make it a point. You mentioned the TV show with your granddaughter Harper. How old was she when you did the show?
She was 12. She was 12 going on 20. and a sidebar on it, Kelly Ripa had her dad as part of the show. I guess it's a way to get him some money and little background on each person. She said, "I understand you belong to a very interesting club." As well as a group of friends who go down to spring training every year, drink wine and have hot dogs and share life. What's the name? The Old Farts Club, which Jim is also a member of. And she said to her dad, "Dad, that sounds like a great club for you." Which he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, we're not taking in new members." But when I talked about what the experience that we have in this group to people, and almost always you see, especially to men, their eyes light up, and sometimes they say, "Could I join?" What we do in this group of 9 men is strip naked emotionally and discuss things like, what's the thing you regret most in your life? How did your parents influence you? The moment there isn't a wife of any of the members who doesn't feel that it's changed their husbands to some degree for the better. And Jim, you could confirm that.
Absolutely. And it goes to the core of what we're talking about, Dick, which is the importance of relationships. George, there's a lot of science in this area, and the fellow you grew up with named Aristotle wrote a lot about the importance of friendship. He spoke about it, he wrote about it. What's the scientific background on why relationships, but in particular male friendships, why is it important? What role does it play in our development and in our mental health?
Just to be clear, Aristotle was 2 years ahead of me. Anyway. So you kind of wonder what things are learned and what things are biologically hardwired in terms of who we grow up and how we behave. And
does it go to a survival instinct?
I think at the most fundamental level, we are hardwired to exist in groups. And it's not just humans. Apparently, we share this with other mammals. And mammals basically survive because they survive in groups. And as they say, there's no I in team. And the people that thought there was, their lineage probably didn't last very long. Mammals survived because they hunted in groups, they defended in groups, even though they were facing predators who were much larger and stronger. But we know there's some flexibility, that there's variability in, do I want to belong to a group or do I not? Years and years and years ago, a psychologist by the name of Zimbardo wrote about shyness and said, not everybody is as equally motivated to form networks and form groups. So there was a psychologist at Harvard who went into a newborn basic nursery and believed that he could identify newborn children who were going to be outgoing, gregarious, versus shy, and then followed them for a decade and found out that there were certain things that he could identify, and I don't even remember what the checklist was, but the fascinating thing was that there were certain things that were exhibited even within days of birth that had implications for socialization, which suggests a hard wiring component. Now, here's the best news of all, though, because I was a painfully shy kid, just painfully shy, to the point that I was considered aloof and narcissistic because I would shy away from people, not because I thought I was somehow superior to them, but quite the opposite. I was just painfully shy. But we also know of a mechanism called neuroplasticity where the brain can rewire itself in amazing degrees, so that even the most shy person can become outgoing. I can never be as outgoing as Jim McCann is, but I can be more outgoing than George, the shy version, was. And that's the exciting thing. So who we are is this amazing combination of nature and nurture. And we sometimes give short shrift to the nurturing part. So there's hope for all of us, I think.
Well, as a still in recovery shy person, George. I guess your comment is evidence that so far so good. But I think most people think they're shy, don't they?
Good question. There is some evidence just looking at the same area of the brain that about 80% of people are pessimistic, which would contribute to shyness. Only about 20% are optimistic, which would contribute to outgoing.
We put our heart into everything we do. We are farmers, bakers, florists, and makers who grow and create with a passion. 1-800-Flowers. Share with love.
Why is it, guys, that men in particular seem to have experienced the negative impact of the changing roles for us in society? There's been a lot of conversation about wokeism and selection criteria, and is it appropriate? Has it achieved its goals? What's the negative impact of that? And when I read the other day that 80% of all suicides in the United States are men, tells me something's particularly wrong with men in their roles. I know I'm a fan of Scott Galloway, the professor at NYU, and he wrote a book recently and speaks often about the role of young men in this country and how they're being marginalized, and he's very concerned about their role in culture and society and their lack of appropriate identity and maybe being pushed in directions that aren't perfectly suited. But why is it that men seem to be particularly challenged in the area of friendships and in coping with the changing roles we seem to be playing in our cultures?
I have a sense that men of today's generation are lost emotionally as men of our generation were. Men are supposed to be the strong ones, the ones who take charge, who solve problems, don't show softness, if you will. I mean, I talk to as many young people as I can and try to mentor as many as I can. But we're living in a world that is turning inside out. I, in my generation, can't understand parts of it. But when you talk to young people, they absolutely seem lost.
George, what role technology is playing? Where does it help? Where should we be concerned?
So I think it's a double-edged sword, like most things in life. I am a huge fan of the ability to access information like never before. I used to spend hours, and the three of us, I'm sure, hours in college in the library. We used to call it the stacks, the journal stacks. And you this is terrible. You go find the journal. Finally, you found it. You open the page, and somebody ripped the pages out. You know, that was the article you wanted. Now I can research a book. You were kind enough to mention I've written a few books. I can research a book that would take me a year in the past, and I can research it in 2 months now. And do a more thorough job. Here's the problem. Speaking as an academic, you're not always sure at first blush the credibility of the information you're finding. So I can say that as an academic, and I'll do my due diligence and I'll trace it back. But here's where it applies to your comment. We see a lot of things online about people, and sometimes they're not nice. So there's this negative side to accessing information. It is a gift to the bullies in the world, and we know how tragically toxic bullying is, and how many kids have literally no hyperbole died directly or indirectly because of bullying. It seems to me that social movements historically move in extremes. So we go in one extreme and we recognize that's not good, And we try to pull it back to the middle, but it almost never succeeds. We go in the other extreme. So the internet, social media, has now given a platform for some of the most unhappy people who, rather than seeking perhaps to feel better in more pro-social ways, maybe they're just not given the opportunity, are lashing out at people through the social media. And it's therapeutic in the sense that I may feel bad, and the only way for me to feel better is to make sure you feel as bad, if not worse, than I do. And the internet provides a platform to do that, which is very, very sad.
And I think the idea of anonymity contributes to poor behavior in a social media context. From a customer service point of view, people have been taught by all of us trying to provide the best possible service to our customers that there is no jeopardy for their poor behavior. And so they used to start out with, hey, I have a problem. Now, sometimes some people, not all, and not even many, but some, will start at 1,000 degrees. This is ridiculous, and on the offensive, and sometimes quite offensively. And I think it's because of this feeling of anonymity, combination of anonymity and a role is on the customer. You should be falling over backwards to help me. More than that, to do everything I want when I want. To your point, time is no longer a factor. But I think it's got so many pluses to it too, in terms of how it's impacting my life, as you say about research. I was on a meeting call last week. And we're just deploying a lot of AI around the flowers companies now. And the meeting was in over 5 minutes, and I got a memo from one of the participants in the meeting who had summarized it beautifully and were with follow-up notes and everything. And it was like, it wasn't 5 minutes later. And this was an hour-long meeting. And I went over there and said, John, how'd you do this? He goes, oh, a buddy of mine wrote this app. And I just had the app listen in on our conversation. I just had to make a couple of edits, very small, at the end. So it's improving things in so many ways, but it does challenge us because of that anonymity aspect. But Dick, like you said, you appeared on a TV show, a friend sees it, and wonders if it's a guy you grew up with, and now your relationship is back where it was. So it's got so many positives to it too. But let's shift now to the other side of that, which is workplace relationships. We wrote last week about the importance of friendship and the importance of interpersonal relationships at work, and how work is so much more than just a paycheck. It's definitely a learning environment, should be, can be, and it's definitely a social environment. And we know that people have more friends, live longer, have less chance of cancer and heart disease. But when longtime married couples were asked recently, I heard this on Dr. Peter Attia's show recently, when couples were asked how many friends they have and who's their best friend, women had many, many more friends than did the male, the husband in the relationship. And 40% of the time, the men said their best friend was their wife, and only in 5% of the times did the wife say their best friend was their husband. And that's interesting and consequential, but I think it speaks to the role that, Dick, you were talking about, how attitudes about how men should be and how they behave is changing. And then also I heard a fellow by the name of Arthur Brooks talk about adult male relationships and said that 9/11 had a very important role in changing how men feel they can express their emotions publicly, and as a result of what we collectively experienced with 9/11. Thoughts on that?
I think men still have a difficult time expressing their emotions and revealing themselves. Interesting thing that I've noted. You notice over the last couple of years how many men hug? It fascinates me. That's a sign of emotion, I think. But part of it is the listening, which was said earlier. One of the things I do when I meet new people, if I'm at dinner, I'll ask a very simple question. How'd you guys meet? And I get these incredible stories about how people meet. And there's a moment where something clicks and you're connecting because I'm listening to them and I want to know about them. I find that with some of my close male friends now, when I'm talking to them on the phone, last thing I say to them when I hang up is love you. I do that with my children and my grandchildren. My wife died. My grandson and I were going to dinner a few months later. He started talking about my wife and then turned to me and said, you know, Appa, the last thing that he said to me was, I love you. I think that's the emotion that men are willing to accept if you could unlock the key to their emotions.
Larry, do you see a change in your social community and the change in how men are behaving, how they express emotion?
Yeah, I think what Dick said is really interesting. I think the hug is the new handshake, even if it's a partial one. Our other arm goes to the back of the person we're greeting, and it's really nice. And I think there's a generational issue. I mean, my dad, and I just got back from Normandy, so I'm thinking about the greatest generation a lot. And my dad was the poster child of the greater generation, age-wise, the way his life unfolded, the role that World War II played in it. And my father never told me he loved me. I know he loved me. He's got a lifelong proof of it. I never heard those words come from my dad. I love you. Maybe when he was like 90, but not growing up. I'm not smart enough to know why it's changed so dramatically, but I would say that generationally it has changed. And maybe we're seeing more of it in others, I don't know, in the media and movies. But me saying I love you to my children started day one, hasn't stopped. And me saying I love you to dear friends, as Dick said, I do that as well.
And it's for the better.
No question. The first people that started hugging, if I go, played a lot of basketball in my day, hung around with a lot of African American guys. I remember hugging them, after a game, meeting them on the courts or whatever with a handshake and a hug, way before it was mainstream as it is now. And again, I'm not a sociologist or an anthropologist and can't really identify why, but I was hugging my African American friends 40 years ago and started hugging everyone else 15 years ago. It's interesting.
I think it's very interesting. And a friend of mine, Dr. Jim Taylor, wrote a book, several books, but one he wrote a long time ago, referenced that if you want to see where fashion and culture is going, look to the urban inner cities. And that stuck with me when he made that comment, which was probably 20 plus years ago. And it's true from a fashion point of view at all. And maybe the bro culture, the hug kind of relationship that came from, in particular, sports, in particular, I think basketball, in the urban centers of the country contributed to that, which begs me to ask you, Larry, to tell us just briefly about the big project you're involved in and the special night that you're celebrating.
So there's a park in St. Louis called Forest Park. It's the second largest urban park in America, and it's right in the middle of the city of St. Louis. It borders Washington University and our renowned medical complex, Barnes Hospital and Barnes Jewish Hospital. And Forest Park has never had basketball courts, not a rim in it. I moved to St. Louis 35 years ago. I got on my bike, I threw my basketball on my spring-loaded rack on the back, and I rode into Forest Park looking for the courts. Well, about 3 hours later, after stopping people, where are the courts? Well, I think they're over there. There were no courts. And there were no courts for a really sad reason, is because there was a lot of concern it would attract the wrong element to the park and lead to problems. So I've been working on it for 30 years, 35 years, and courts were approved a year ago, and we got the money, and the ribbon cutting is a week from yesterday. But let's talk about social media for a second. The article was announced that the ribbon cutting is announced, the date was July 9th will be the ribbon cutting, and tons of loves and likes, hundreds of them, and 170 comments. I would say 60 to 70% of them were horribly ugly, really ugly. Anonymous, mean, ugly, racist. I'm just underlining the point you were saying about the anonymity of social media. The people, George, was saying, that are unhappy and don't like something, and they find that it was terribly depressing to read those. Some of the most outlandish things I've ever read, and the reason why there have not been basketball courts in Forest Park. So it's sad, really sad.
Let's finish up here, very self-centered. Besides friendship, the other thing we share is that we're all getting older. And I played golf with a friend a couple of weeks ago who's 91, very accomplished guy, lost his wife just last year. The toughest thing is loneliness. Not only the loneliness of his wife, but he says, all of my friends are gone. I think we can be well served by being conscious of the fact that we have to work at our age to maintain a balance of different kinds of relationships in our life. And when I say work at it, it doesn't just happen by accident. I meet people circumstantially. That is, I need an excuse to be spending time with them at work, on a project, at a game, so that relationships can percolate. What advice, George, Dick, Larry, would you have for people like us to be conscious of and to be deliberate about and to work to maintain and develop relationships? And it has to be intergenerational, because at some point when we get to the end of the cone, there's just not enough of us of the same age. George?
So relationships are predicated on two things. You ready? Proximity and homophily. So homophily is a shared interest of some kind. Proximity is being able to be in contact. Now, normally that meant physical contact, person to person, as opposed to the virtual contact that we're experiencing now. So my advice to people who are feeling lonely is identify some unifying theme, an interest, a hobby, a content area, and then go where those people are, whether it's virtual or in person. So you mentioned golf. I play golf very poorly, but for me, it has become, we have a Thursday night, 5 o'clock, 9-hole twilight gathering where anywhere from 5 to 15 people meet at 5 o'clock. We show up on the first tee and we play 9 holes of golf. And then the majority go to dinner, and some people will then join us for dinner who didn't play golf. The homophily is the golf and the dinner, but the showing up is, you got to get up. You got to get out of your house. You got to expend the energy. You have to overcome inertia to make the effort to do so. But you put those two things together, Jim, and magic happens.
A new word. Dick?
I lost my wife almost 2 years ago. We had a 57-year love affair. That was a gift, and I treasure every moment of it, treasure the memories. I have friends who lost their spouse who curl up in a corner, feel guilty when they're laughing. I've been blessed to be surrounded by friends, and I discovered that I like my own company. So I'm constantly in touch with people, not seeing them as much as I'd like sometimes, but I got my phone bill recently, and I noticed that I spent 5,000 minutes on the phone last month. And I'm constantly in touch with people all over the world. who are just friends, who I call if they don't call me and say, how are you doing? And I had one recently say to me, well, that's another time. I said, what the hell does that mean? And turned out that he was told 2 weeks before he's terminally ill. We had a 20-minute conversation about it. And that, to me, is what relationships are all about, reaching out and touching people. So I'm blessed to have a family that I spend time with. But more important, I keep saying to people, as we get older, besides our health, the only thing that matters are relationships. So yes, many of the people I grew up with are gone, but many of the people who I've made friends with are still with us, and I'm still learning from them and hopefully giving them some of my wisdom as to what's really important in life.
George, you mentioned if you're feeling lonely, Larry, you'll bring us home, but I just want to inject that I think we should be thinking as adult men. I think we should be thinking prophylactically, not just waiting till we're lonely, but to think about how do we maintain our network of male relationships, friends, so that we don't get to the page. Don't wait until you feel lonely. It's something that you should do hygienically all along. Larry, bring us home.
Well, I agree with what both George and Dick said. I want to take George's proximity and hemethily, because I'm going to use that word, make believe I made it up. But I'd like to add a twist to that, just a twist, and that is around the shared interest. The third thing I would add to that is one of the shared interests should be to get together with people who aren't necessarily like-minded, but also they'd like to get together with people who aren't like-minded. And that's what equals diversity and diversity of thought. I don't want the guardrails of shared interest to be too narrow, but the shared interest of people who are looking forward to meeting new people with new ideas and new ways of looking at things. Let's face it, I have a lot of friends, too many, that have very tight guardrails, and I don't think it's healthy as you grow older. I know a lot of Democrats that don't have a Republican in their Rolodex. I know a lot of Jewish people that don't have anybody who's non-Jewish in their circle. So I think the homophily is really, really interesting, with the shared interest also being other people who have a shared interest of meeting people who aren't like-minded. Does that make any sense as a bring it home comment?
I certainly think it does, and I think it's something we should pay more attention to. I see the radicalization of our political beliefs, of our social attitudes, and of our relationships as being a hindrance to good mental health. And I think you made that point beautifully, Larry. I think you all made such great points today. Thanks for sharing your gift of your time, your knowledge, your friendship with me. And I hope, I know from the last time we did this together, the feedback I got anecdotally from a lot of people that I know, some are friends, that it really caused them to think and maybe change their behavior in their life. And how lucky are we that we get to have this conversation for ourselves, and maybe someone else will take something from it. Thanks, Dick Auletta, George Everly, Larry Zarin, for sharing your time with me today and with us. And I can't wait till we gather again like this.
We put our heart into everything we do. We are farmers, bakers, florists, and makers who grow and create with a passion. Made with love at every step of the way. Because at the end of the day, we know you're sending more than a gift. 1-800-Flowers, share with love.
Well, I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and I know I'll be sharing it forward. I hope you get to as well. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow me along on Twitter at Jim1800Flowers and on LinkedIn at Jim McCann. Hope to talk to you soon.